program, The Russ Belville Show, is intended for responsible adults only. We advocate to the repeal of marijuana prohibition for adults. We discuss the science, culture, and controversy about America's marijuana laws. We do not advocate any illegal activity and encourage all listeners to learn their state and federal marijuana laws. Opinions and claims made by guests and advertisers on The Russ Belville Show are their own, and The Russ Belville Show cannot be held legally responsible for their validity or reliability. Viewer discretion is advised. The Prohibition Opposition Television Network, brought to you by the National Cannabis Coalition.
You take a seed, you plant it, you grow it, you dry it, you roll it, you smoke it. You take a seed, you plant it, you grow it, you dry it, you roll it, you smoke it, and it goes down smooth. Hey!
Spanning the continent to bring you the truth about cannabis and marijuana law reform.
I smoke pot and I like it a lot.
From the promise of legalization.
And I think that we need to rethink and decriminalize our marijuana laws.
To the agony of prohibition.
One major responsibility is to encourage people to use less drugs.
The Prohibition Opposition Television Network presents The Russ Belville Show, the voice of the marijuana nation. Now, here's your host, Radical Russ Belville.
Oh, yeah. Good day, tokers and tokettes, lovers of liberty everywhere. Welcome to the show. It is Tuesday, June 5th, 2012, and it's got to be 420 somewhere in the world. Thanks for taking the time to join us here at Rolla J Studios in beautiful Portland, Oregon, where all my graphics are still from yesterday's show. I did a different view last night, so those graphics are the wrong ones. We'll get the right ones up there just as soon as we can. Joining us here in the studio, of course, we have Wiz Kaliko hanging out there on camera 3. How you doing, Kaliko?
Aloha, doing quite well. Glad to be back for another day on the Russ Belville Show.
I know, your graphics are actually correct.
Well, I'm always correct.
I don't know how you pulled that off, but good job, Kaliko.
Thank you.
Also joining us from the virtual studio in Astoria, Oregon is our own senior news editor, Cannabis Carrie.
Hello.
So
welcome to the second day. How exciting.
I know. Day 2, ready to go. We're having ourselves a good time. We had a great audience yesterday for the show, for the debut. And today I went and made the change out on iTunes for the podcast links. So people that had been subscribing to the old URLs, you'll get an update and you'll start getting the new podcast feeds coming down to you. So that should be taking place pretty soon. We'll get all those statistics ready for everyone. But before we get into the show, let me tell you what we've got for today. Great couple of interviews coming up. If you are interested in reforming marijuana laws, if you want to know what's happening all across this country, today is the day to tune in. We've got NORML's Deputy Director, Paul Armentano, joining us to give us a rundown on what's happening in the state legislatures. And believe it or not, we got stories from the East Coast, specifically the Northeast, where we've got Vermont, New Hampshire, Connecticut, and Rhode Island all moving forward on different forms of marijuana reform. We've also got California news to bring to you as well. And then after Paul Armentano's segment, we've got Adam Smith joining us live right here in the studio. He's the chief petitioner behind IP24, the initiative to pass a constitutional amendment to legalize marijuana right here in the state of Oregon. He's going to stick with us through the second hour as well, so you can call in and ask your questions about Oregon's constitutional amendment to legalize marijuana. Before we get to all of that, though, let me thank Adam Hand from Handmade Apparel for our new shirts. If you can see the Russ Belville Show official polo shirt, Carrie, I've got yours down here. You can pick it up anytime.
Oh, exciting.
And also today is Electric Tuesday. I've got some great Electric Tuesday music that goes back to my childhood. If you're a Star Trek fan, you're going to like today's song. And if you're not a Star Trek fan, well, tough. You're going to like today's song anyway. But now, let's get to our headlines before we do all of that. After our first break, Carrie brings us the Daily Cannabis Chronicle. What's in the news today?
Well, today we've got stories from the East, the West Coast, and somewhere in the middle. I'll call it the North. We've got a story coming out of Washington, D.C. Remember, Russ, they're trying to get their program up and running, and the mayor had some comments today I want to share with you. Also, we're going to go out to Arizona, where they are still struggling to get those dispensaries opened. I was going to tell you about that small window of opportunity. We're going to see how many people took the bait, and we're going to go to another big court ruling that happened while we were on break that we've got to weigh in on. That all coming up in today's Daily Cannabis Chronicles.
All right, and you'll also get all of those news stories up at radicalruss.com, so you can follow up with all the links. We're right back after a few messages.
Back after these messages from our 420 friendly sponsors. Support these advertisers because their ad money goes straight to the Russ Belville Show. Help us legalize it. Text NCC to 420-420 and send $10 to the National Cannabis Coalition. You're tuned in to Potnet, where it's 420, 24/7, 365.
Yar, there be pirates here. Yo ho ho ho, and a ton of good smoke. Har har.
Medical marijuana, industrial hemp, ganja sacrament, consumer cannabis. The topic of marijuana is heating up the news, and the Russ Belville Show catches you up with today's latest headlines. Now, here's our senior news editor, Cannabis Carrie, with the Daily Cannabis Chronicle.
That's right. This is Carrie Gallagher for the Russ Belville Show, and this is your news today for Tuesday, June 5th on the Daily Cannabis Chronicle. A big court decision in Michigan played out while we were on break. We have our very first ruling in a medical marijuana case from the Supreme Court of the state of Michigan. Back in September, on the urging of the Michigan ACLU, the Michigan Supreme Court agreed to hear an appeals case involving Larry King, a resident of Owasso. He had a state-issued medical marijuana card, but he had been charged with the crime of cultivating marijuana in his outdoor dog kennel. King was arrested for manufacturing marijuana after police found his weed growing in that locked kennel. The Michigan medical marijuana law states that patients can possess up to 12 plants as long as they are in an enclosed, locked facility. The police took issue with the chain link fence type dog kennel, and King was arrested. King, who was 55 years old, faced felony drug charges for his crime in 2009. He won his case, but it was sent to an appeals court that ruled he couldn't use being a medical marijuana patient as part of his defense. The Court of Appeals ruled that King's dog kennel did not qualify as a place to keep his medical marijuana growing operation. But on May 31st, the Supreme Court overturned that decision and decided that King was entitled to an evidentiary hearing on the matter and that his kennel did fit the qualifications of a locked, enclosed facility. Medical marijuana lawyers and advocates see this ruling as a huge win in the courts. They hope this ruling will make an impact on medical marijuana patients in the state, telling the courts that a simple mistake does not mean criminal intent. That case was just one of several medical marijuana cases that are pending in the Supreme Court in Michigan and the appellate courts. We are still waiting for the issue of dispensaries and patient-to-patient sales of medical marijuana, and if they are or not permitted under the Michigan medical marijuana law. Most of the startup dispensaries in the state have closed after the Michigan Attorney General, Bill Schuette, issued an opinion last summer that they were not permitted and they were illegal. Now, in a separate case that was also resolved within that same ruling back on the 31st, Alexander Kolnick needed a doctor's statement confirming a medical need for marijuana when he was caught with it between the time the state passed the medical marijuana law in 2008, but before the law was enacted in 2009. That ruling affirmed that a doctor's recommendation had to already be in hand. The 25-year-old Kolnick said he was using marijuana to relieve severe problems he had related to Lyme disease, and he said that he had talked to his doctor about the benefits of using medical marijuana, but didn't get the doctor's authorization until after his arrest for possession. These court decisions are helping clarify the Michigan medical marijuana laws that have been debated since they were enacted. We will keep you posted on any more Supreme Court rulings as they come in.
Well, once again, this kind of illustrates the absurdity that happens when you're trying to separate people who are sick enough to protect from arrest versus people who are healthy enough to throw in a cage for their use of cannabis. And in particular here, this comes down to the way that the Michigan Medical Marijuana Act defines an enclosed, locked substructure, an enclosed, locked structure for these people. What's the exact term they use there, Carrie?
Facility.
Thank you.
Right.
My mind was slipping there. An enclosed locked facility, right? So you would think that would be pretty simple, right? If it's got walls around it and you can lock it, it's an enclosed locked facility. But, when it comes to medical marijuana, they want to, run every possible consideration against this. And I guess some of these judges thought that chain link fence wasn't enclosed enough, wasn't locked enough. And of course, they want all of this in an enclosed locked facility because they worry about the possibility of ripoffs, of people trying to steal the marijuana, home invasions, and so on. So they write these into the law, these security standards into the law to try try to prevent those ripoffs from happening, to make sure that the supply of marijuana is secure. Now, notice that nobody who gets a prescription for OxyContin or Xanax or Dilaudid or any of these very stealable pharmaceuticals is required to put them in an enclosed, locked facility. No, most people, it's fine for them to just put it in their medicine cabinet, where, you know, anybody who comes to visit your house can walk into the bathroom and behind a private locked door, open up your medicine cabinet and slip out a few pills here and there. But nobody ever seems to have a problem with that. Nobody ever seems to make a requirement that people that are getting these Schedule 2 and Schedule 3 prescriptions sign some sort of affidavit that says they're going to keep them locked up in a drop box or something to make sure that nobody can get them that shouldn't get them. Only with marijuana do we come up with these laws that say enclosed, locked facilities and restrictions on how much you can have, and you can't ever let it be seen in public lest the public realize that people can use marijuana for medicine. It's just more silly restrictions that we have on the use of marijuana that we don't put on the use of drugs that are much more hard, much more dangerous, much more toxic, much more addictive.
And more big city mayors are getting in on the cannabis law reform discussion. Yesterday, we highlighted a story about New York City Mayor Michael Bloomberg embracing and supporting the governor's bid to decriminalize marijuana further in New York State by making less than 25 grams of marijuana in public view an infraction and not a criminal misdemeanor. Today, we have another big East Coast city mayor speaking out about marijuana in his city. Washington, D.C.'s Mayor Vincent Gray has let officials know in his city that he is ready for them to concentrate on implementing the medical marijuana program in D.C., but he also wants D.C. officials to keep their options open when it comes to dealing with the recreational use of marijuana. As it is now, Washington, D.C. has some of the toughest penalties for marijuana use in the East. If you are caught with any amount of marijuana in your possession, you can face up to 6 months in prison and a $1,000 fine. Now, for comparison, right across from the city in Virginia, those penalties drop down to you needing to be caught with more than half an ounce before you will be eligible for a 30-day jail sentence and a $500 fine. Mayor Gray was in a press conference this morning when the question came up from a reporter asking about the progress of Washington, D.C.'s medical marijuana program. Initiative 59 was voted for back in 1998 by an overwhelmingly majority of the residents, but it wasn't adopted by the city council until 2010. Now, 2 years later, it is still in the process of getting off the ground. After Gray made his comments about recreational use in the city, he admitted that the matter has never come up for serious discussion within the administration. Phil Mendelson, a D.C. City Council member and a chairman of the Public Safety and Judiciary Committee, said the district couldn't consider weakening the penalties for marijuana possession because it would conflict with federal laws. He went on to explain that in D.C., the U.S. attorney is going to expect the same drug policies as the federal government. He said any bill that goes through the District of Columbia also has the added input of the U.S. attorney, who is a player in the legislative process in the city. Now, when questioned further about the D.C. council setting local law in the district, Mendelson said that the U.S. attorney Ronald C. Mayen currently has enough clout within the city council to sway the outcome of the issue. He added that he doesn't necessarily agree with the current penalties for marijuana crimes, but said that the D.C. City Council has not been able to get medical marijuana to the citizens without engaging the U.S. attorney in the process. Now, we are still waiting for the first patient to get a card and the first medical marijuana to be dispensed for hundreds of deserving patients who have waited long enough.
Yeah, they've waited long enough in D.C., they've waited long enough in New Jersey. So many of these states, you know, we just passed medical marijuana in Connecticut, and people like to go around and say, there's 17 medical marijuana states. I don't really think of it like that. I really think of it like there's one quasi-legal state, California. There's 4 or 5 legal medical marijuana states, Washington, Oregon, you could say Montana to some extent, Michigan, and Colorado. And then as far as the rest of the states with medical marijuana programs, Alaska, Hawaii, New Mexico, Arizona, Rhode Island, Connecticut, New Jersey, D.C., Vermont, Maine, etc., most of those states have such restrictive medical marijuana laws that if you're severely sick and disabled, you'll probably be able to qualify and get some access. But generally speaking, they're not what we would think of, those of us out west would think of as a, quote, medical marijuana state, at least in as far as the culture goes and as far as the social acceptance and understanding and openness of medical marijuana goes. And we just need to look no further than D.C. and New Jersey to see what can happen when the federal government or a recalcitrant governor does not want to see a medical marijuana law implemented. In New Jersey, we see it with Governor Chris Christie stonewalling, for over 28, 30 months now or so on this law that has been passed since 2010. Same thing in D.C. It's been passed since 2010. But in the D.C. case, since it is a federal district, they have a lot of pressure from our federal Congress to not implement this law. We got to get these laws implemented in these East Coast states, and we're going to keep fighting to do so, and we'll keep you posted as we finally start to protect some patients out on the East Coast.
And before there was Connecticut, Arizona was one of the last in the freshman class of medical marijuana states. And like every program before, the Arizona medical marijuana program has had its starts and stops and challenges. The biggest challenge, of course, has been to implement the state's dispensary program. The state's own governor, Jan Brewer, had challenged that provision of the medical marijuana law, making state-registered medical marijuana patients wait for a safe, reliable place to get their medical marijuana. Now, that lawsuit was dismissed and the program has been allowed to go forward. The latest hoop that would-be dispensary operators had to jump through was the very small window of opportunity they had to get in all their paperwork along with their applications turned in. The Arizona Department of Health Services announced only weeks before that they would accept applications beginning on May 11th, and that window was closed on May 25th. Applicants had to turn in the 4-page application, a background check saying they had no felonies on their record, a clear and cogent plan for security and safety at the planned facility, and all the paperwork, either rental or ownership papers, that showed their location would be following all zoning rules where applicable. The application process was only open to those over 21, and they also had to turn in paperwork showing that they were filing to run a nonprofit business. All those applications were turned in with a $5,000 filing fee, and although not required, those nonprofit business planners could also turn in proof that they had $150,000 in their bank accounts to be given favor over those applicants that did not turn in such proof. Also, recent Arizona court decisions concerning business loans on dispensaries mean that finding a bank willing to do business with you will be difficult, as well as finding any business loans. A recent court decision said that a business loan to a dispensary was uncollectible since marijuana is federally illegal and you cannot collect on a contract with a federally illegal business. Now, with all those hoops, still 484 companies applied for what must be legally capped at 126 dispensaries statewide, which by law is 1 per every 10 pharmacies in the state. The law states the Arizona Department of Health Services cannot share any of the information on the applications. That's all secret, since the applications must include letters from local and counties and towns and local governments. All the local governments are releasing all that information under the state's open record laws. Dispensaries in Arizona will be allowed to grow marijuana and sell infused food products, and also sell marijuana to other dispensaries. Now, the Arizona Department of Health Service plans to randomly pick the dispensaries that get those licenses during an August 7th drawing, with the first picks, of course, going to those with that hefty bank account.
Yeah, no doubt about that. Did you say 484 companies applied at $5,000 per application? Did I get that right?
That's what I said, Russ, in 2 short weeks.
Wow. 2 weeks, they raised $1.2 million for the state of Arizona just through the application fees. Now, do they have to refund those fees if they don't pick one of these people, or do they just get to keep the fee?
You know, I believe that they do have to refund those fees, but I will double check with the Department of Health and Services and get back to you on that one.
Yeah, geez, what a great way to raise some money. So 2 weeks, we get 484 companies that are applying for a limited set of dispensary licenses out there. And the way they cap that in Arizona, it's capped based on the number of pharmacies in the state. Isn't it something like 1 for every 10 pharmacies?
Yeah, and real quick, Russ, I did want to say they do have a plan going forward after this first round is picked. Every year they're going to reevaluate that number. They won't take dispensaries away, but if more pharmacies open, they'll add more, and they will give preference in the future to any dispensaries that want to open in a rural area.
Oh, okay. Well, you know, one of the problems with this, of course, is Arizona's law has that 25-mile halo clause attached to it. And what that means is if you live within 25 miles of a dispensary, you cannot grow at home. And so we got a situation here where, you know, it's been a while, you know, a couple of years here since they've passed the law. Some patients are already growing their own gardens. They've already got their light setups, everything's ready to go, and they're growing for themselves. And what happens to these poor people when somebody decides to open up a dispensary 24.9 miles away? They're going to have to stop growing. They're going to have to turn in their lights, sell them somehow, and then start shopping at that dispensary. And at the time, I kind of rallied against that clause in the law, because to me, it seemed just like a way of subsidizing the dispensary industry, providing them clientele, forcing them to have clientele, especially when we're talking about the urban areas where they're more likely to be these dispensaries and more likely to be a concentration of the patients to shop at those dispensaries. And my suspicions were confirmed in when I got to ask one of the Marijuana Policy Project's campaign managers at the time about this halo, and he said it was to keep the dispensaries viable, to be able to give them business. As if anybody's ever gone out of business selling weed.
It's 420 back in Idaho, where Russ and Carrie were born. So we have to go connect with our roots. You know what I mean? Please support these sponsors who support the Russ Belville Show.
All right. Got Ganja John in the studio getting ready for the Ganja John show later tonight. And then when we come back, we got some Electric Tuesday music for you. So stick around. You're listening to you're listening to the Russ Belville Show. First time. We'll be right back after this.
Talking to that reefer man.
I'm Sub Cool from Team Green Avenger. At TGAgenetics.com, we are working on the leading edge of medical strains. Our strains are rigorously tested for THC, CBD, THCV, and other critical cannabinoids. Know your grow. Check out our genetic diversity at TGAgenetics.com, the home of Jelly Bean, Jack the Ripper, Vortex, and other award-winning cannabis strains.
I have to say that there was one question that was voted on that ranked fairly high, and that was whether legalizing marijuana would improve the economy and job creation. I don't know what this says about the online audience, but the answer is no. I don't think that is a good strategy to grow our economy. So.
About nearly 1 million lives wrecked by a marijuana arrest every year, Mr. President. Politely tell President Obama what you think about legalization by calling the White House at 202-456-1111. This is Normal Show Live.
Well, obviously going to have to cut back on that liner too. This is the Russ Belville Show. We'll get those things edited as time goes on. Like this edit.
Everyone knows music and marijuana go together, so let's wind up our 20 after break with the Russ Belville Show's Daily Toker Tunes, the best in pod-safe 420 music from around the web. Today is Electric Tuesday, featuring the latest in electronic dance music and other cutting-edge genres. You can get downloads and more information about all our Daily Toker Tunes by visiting music.radicalruss.com. Now, sit back and enjoy your Daily Toker Tune.
All right, so I went out to the IOTA promo net today. By the way, IOTA is independent music distributors, people that release their records, and they release these promo tracks for us, and they're pod-safe music, which means that we can play them and have them on the podcast for recording here. And I went to the electronic music section today, and I just could not resist this album because it's from a group called Spock. Actually, they abbreviate it S-P-O-C-K, and I'm not exactly sure what S-P-O-C-K stands for, but it doesn't matter because they've got this song that they've released, and it's an entire album of Star Trek-themed electronic dance music. There's a song called Never Trust a Klingon that's on there. There's a few others, kind of silly Star Trek stuff. But I picked out this one because it reminded me of the job that I had prior to becoming a marijuana activist. If you've read my website at radicalruss.com and you looked under Why Radical, you'll find a post there called Drug Testing. And it explains how I worked for this company that drug tested me, and it kind of led me to wanting to be an activist. And that company made what I used to call Dr. McCoy's medical beds. They're a company in Beaverton, Oregon that make those really high-tech medical devices for the Army and for major hospitals that, you know, Monty Python would call it the machine that goes bing, right? It's the machines that sit there and they cover your blood and your respiration and your heartbeat and your pulse and your blood pressure and all that kind of stuff, right? So in thinking of Dr. McCoy's medical beds and the company that I used to work for, I picked this tune off of the Spock album. It's called Dr. McCoy Classic. Enjoy it for your Electric Tuesday Daily Toker Tunes. Get your downloads of this and other tunes from Daily Toker Tunes at music.radicalruss.com.
Multi-talented, knows all the tricks. Been almost everywhere in the galaxy. Traveled time and changed history. Has a running feud with a green-blooded man. Takes every opportunity to argue if he can. He's one of a kind, says what's on his mind. You might think he's complaining when you hear him say, Doctor, not an escalator. He's a doctor, not a brake later. He's a doctor, not a shuttle conductor. But everybody knows him as Dr. McCoy. He's a doctor, not an engineer. He's a doctor, and not a magician. He's a doctor, not a psychiatrist. And you know that I'm talking about Dr. McCoy. Doesn't like transporters at all. Prefers a shuttle if possible. Suffered once from St. Polycythemia. Married twice and has a daughter Joanna. Charged with murder of a Klingon chancellor. Managed to escape with a fellow officer. Doesn't make house calls, had a contra in his head. Kills a rainy day and wakes up the dead. He's a doctor, not an escalator. He's a doctor, not a brake later. He's a doctor, not a shuttle conductor. But everybody knows him as Dr. McCoy. He's a doctor, not an engineer. He's a doctor, and not a magician. He's a doctor, not a psychiatrist. And you know that I'm talking about Dr. McCoy.
As High Times Senior Cultivation Editor, I'm often called into the field and asked to sample or even identify exotic strains of marijuana in their natural habitat. Now, for the first time, I've compiled more than 120 of my favorite strains into this single field guide designed to fit into your pocket as you travel the world in search of your favorite plant. From a friend's closet grow room to the wilds of Northern California, this single guide covers all of today's best-known strains, plus heirlooms and throwbacks, including High Times quality photos and information on each variety's genetic heritage and growing characteristics, plus my personal notes on aroma, flavor, and potency. So this is Danny Danko, author of the official High Times Field Guide to Marijuana Strains, wishing you good times and great ganja.
The official High Times Field Guide to Marijuana Strains is available at hightimes.com and finer bookstores.
Coral Reefer Live with news, nugs, and 420 lifestyle from the Bay Area. Visit the YouTube channel at Coral Reefer 420.
When I was in England, I experimented with marijuana a time or two, and I didn't like it, and didn't inhale, and never tried it again.
I think you'd probably be a lot cooler if you had, Mr. President.
Said, hey, do you have a joint, kid? Sure would be a lot cooler if you did. Lie, don't hide it. Oh, lie, don't hide it. Just lie, don't hide it. Fire up right
Marijuana re-legalization is not likely to happen first at the federal level. It's going to happen state by state. We turn now to our 50-state legislatures and assemblies for the Russ Belville Show's Legalization Legislation Update.
I recorded this interview with Paul Armentano yesterday. Enjoy. All right, welcome back, everybody, to the Russ Belville Show. As you know, we are all about covering the wide world of marijuana reform. And here in the United States, we know that changing marijuana laws is going to happen at the state level. The feds are way behind on this issue. So one organization that's been fighting for this longer than anyone is the National Organization for the Reform of Marijuana Laws. And their Deputy Director, Paul Armentano, joins us to tell us what's going on in the state legislatures. Paul, welcome to the show.
It's good to be here, Russ.
All right. So surprisingly, when we talk about marijuana reform, we're usually talking about the West, but our stories today almost all focus on the Northeast with breaking news here about the Nutmeg State, the state of Connecticut. Tell us the good news there.
Sure. In Connecticut, as we had expected, the governor, Dan Malloy, on Friday signed into law Public Act 12-55, and that is Connecticut's new medical marijuana law. Connecticut is now the 17th state to legalize the limited use and distribution of marijuana for therapeutic purposes, and Connecticut's law will officially go into effect on October 1st of this year.
Yeah, this is some remarkable work, and it was just last year that Connecticut became the 14th state to decriminalize personal use, and we have one man to thank, maybe more than any others, and that's with Connecticut NORML, Eric Williams out there, been doing great work.
Yeah, Eric Williams has been our point person in Connecticut the last couple of years. He has been pivotal at moving these marijuana law reform measures forward over the last couple of years. I should note that arrests for marijuana have fallen in the state of Connecticut by about a total of half in the 1 year or so since that decriminalization measure has been enacted, and clearly he played the lead role in shepherding this medical marijuana measure through the legislature this year as well. Folks that want to get involved in marijuana law reform in the state of Connecticut should reach out to Eric Williams, and they can find Connecticut NORML on Facebook, and they hold very regular meetings in that state.
That is so excellent. And, when we look at the trends in medical marijuana legislation, it seems like we get West Coast states and East Coast states with very different looks at how medical marijuana should be handled. Give us some of the details on Connecticut's medical marijuana program and how that shapes up against some of the other states.
Connecticut's program is definitely taking a different approach. Unlike most existing medical marijuana laws, the law in Connecticut at this time does not allow for home grow. It does allow for the state to license dispensaries, and interestingly, it designates that licensed pharmacists need to be the individuals that are actually distributing the marijuana to patients in those dispensaries. In the next coming months, there are going to be further rules and regulations that are mandated regarding what this program is going to look like, but it's certainly going to be a novel approach, not just for an East Coast state, but really for any medical marijuana state.
Yeah, you know, I know when we first got medical marijuana passed out west that they used the word recommendation, and the reason for that was, you know, doctors, if they had to do a prescription, that ran afoul of the DEA and some of their prescribing practices. So is there a similar issue with pharmacists when we're talking about pharmacists distributing what would still be federally a Schedule I narcotic?
It's going to remain to be seen. It's certainly not believed to be so among the lawmakers that were involved in writing the language, but certainly it was a concern that I had when I saw some of the initial drafts of this bill. But clearly, the lawmakers in Connecticut right now, including the governor, are standing by this language, and they think this is going to be a workable solution, and they think this is going to be a law that later this year will, in fact, be in full effect.
All right. Well, we'll keep an eye on Connecticut and see how that shakes out. Also happening up in the New England states, we've got New Hampshire, which has, you know, since 2007 has made strides to try to pass medical marijuana, only to be thwarted by their governor. What's the latest up there in the Granite State?
Well, unfortunately, they still have a governor in place, Governor John Lynch, who would like to thwart their efforts. But fortunately, right now, there is legislation pending that has already been passed by the House by a supermajority. And the pivotal vote is going to come this Wednesday when the Senate engages in what's known as a concurrence vote on Senate Bill 409, which is their proposed medical marijuana law. Now, the Senate, all the way back in March, approved this bill by a vote of 13 to 11. The measure then went to the House, where it was overwhelmingly approved. Because the House made some minor changes to the language of the bill, it now goes back to the Senate, where it has to be reapproved by the Senate. And what activists on the ground are doing in these final few days before the vote is really lobbying on 3 or 4 key Senate lawmakers, because we know that Governor Lynch is likely going to veto this bill if it gets to his desk. He's done so before, and the version that he got 2 years ago was actually far more restrictive than the version that lawmakers are working off this year. So we know Governor Lynch is a problem. If we get 3 additional votes in the Senate, 3 additional senators switch their no votes to yes votes, then we know there's nothing Governor Lynch can do. Then we know we will have a veto-proof majority in both the House and the Senate, and New Hampshire will then become the 18th state to legalize medical marijuana. And I should note that the language that lawmakers are working off in New Hampshire is much more similar to the sort of West Coast versions of medical marijuana laws that folks are familiar with. It allows for home grow, for instance, and it has a quite a wide range of recommended conditions for which a physician could recommend cannabis.
Yeah, and of course, New Hampshire up there is buttressed by 2 medical marijuana states, Maine and Vermont, and of course we've got now Connecticut and Rhode Island is nearby as well. So you would think that it would be something that they could handle up there in New Hampshire. As this moves forward here, how can people get in touch? You know, 3 senators. That's not much that we have to convince. You know, to be able to get this veto-proof majority. How can they contact their senators there in New Hampshire?
Great question. There is a group on the ground known as New Hampshire Compassion. They're online at nhcompassion.org. Individuals can also go to NORML's website, click on the ACT button. That is going to bring you to all of our legislative alerts. I have just updated the alert for New Hampshire, and it actually shows people the contact information for these senators that we believe can be targeted and have their no votes switched to yes votes prior to Wednesday's vote. There's also a link to the directory for the state senators in New Hampshire, and we're encouraging folks to go ahead and call those senators. We also have a link to the Marijuana Policy Project site where they have the Senate tally vote from this past March. So you can look at that, see if your senator previously voted yes or previously voted no. If he or she voted yes, I'd encourage folks to call them and encourage them once again to vote yes. But if they voted no, I would even more strongly encourage folks to call him or her and urge them to switch their vote on this issue. All that information is available at NORML's Take Action Center, and it's simply a matter of going to normal.org, look in the right-hand corner of the website, and click on the box that says Act.
All right. And more New England news. We move to the ocean state now, Rhode Island, which has had medical marijuana since, I believe, 2006. But there's been some difficulties with getting dispensaries put into play. Kind of a weird tale going on there in Rhode Island, but apparently it's got some resolution. Tell us what's happening there.
You're right. This is a weird tale. Rhode Island legislatively approved the possession and cultivation of medical marijuana several years ago, and for all extents and purposes, the program has been working pretty much without incident. Well, several years ago, lawmakers decided to expand the existing medical marijuana law by allowing the state to approve licensed dispensaries, and those dispensaries were on track to open last year. But shortly before their opening, incoming Governor Lincoln Chafee suspended that part of the program because he was fearful that the federal government could potentially come in and shut down these operations and threaten state employees who are involved in licensing these operations. And of course, we'd seen those similar threats from U.S. attorneys in other states, like in Washington State, like in Delaware, and elsewhere. Well, an interesting thing happened over the last year or so. Enough patients got in Lincoln Chafee's ear and convinced him to basically lift this suspension and go ahead with the dispensary program. So over the last few months, the governor worked with House lawmakers and Senate lawmakers to essentially redraft the dispensary legislation. And that legislation was passed by lawmakers and signed by the governor within the last few days. And once again, Rhode Island is on track to license state distributors and producers of medical marijuana in the state of Rhode Island. According to the latest regulations, these compassion centers would be able to produce up to 150 marijuana plants at any one time, or they would be able to possess and distribute up to 1,500 ounces of marijuana at any one time once they are approved by health regulators in that state.
It's kind of weird. It's almost like getting a do-over here for some reason. We also have, don't we also have decriminalization pending there in Rhode Island?
Yes. In fact, lawmakers in Rhode Island are also addressing the issue of possession of marijuana for recreational purposes. There is a House bill known as House Bill 7092. Its companion bill in the Senate is Senate Bill 2253. And what both of these bills seek to do is to remove the existing criminal penalties for the possession of up to an ounce of marijuana. Under the proposed legislation, anyone age 18 or over could possess up to 1 ounce of marijuana for any purpose they wish, and that would be a non-criminal offense. It would be a civil infraction punishable by no more than a $150 fine, which is actually a significant improvement from the existing law, which allows for a $500 fine, criminal incarceration, and potentially a lifelong criminal record. This measure has passed out of committee in both the House, it's passed out of committee in the Senate, and it's awaiting floor votes in both chambers of the legislature right now.
And you said that was for anyone 18 and older? It's kind of rare we hear that.
It is, and that's why I emphasize that point.
All right. Now, moving over to the Garden State of New Jersey, where they've passed medical marijuana in 2010 through the governor's signature, the outgoing governor. They have yet to protect a single patient. So from the Department of Tilting at Windmills, we have a decriminalization measure pending. Tell us what's happening with that.
Sure. Well, I think the state's failure to enact the medical marijuana law that, as you noted, is now more than 2.5 years old, is actually, in large part, the impetus for this decriminalization measure. The idea that, as you said, not one single patient is yet to be protected under the law, under the medical marijuana law. I think many lawmakers in New Jersey simply said, well, then let's just go ahead and simply decriminalize marijuana for everybody. And there is legislation, as you noted, pending in the New Jersey Assembly. It's Assembly Bill 1465. This is a bill that just a couple of weeks ago unanimously passed out of committee. Republicans, Democrats alike, nobody had any objections to the notion of allowing an adult to possess up to, in this case, a half ounce of marijuana and no longer face an arrest or any sort of criminal penalties or criminal record. Once again, this is a decriminalization measure. It would replace existing criminal possession penalties with civil penalties, which would be punishable by a fine, a maximum fine of $150. We expected this measure to have a full assembly floor vote a couple of weeks ago, but instead what we got that day were lawmakers introducing a pair of amendments regarding this measure. The core amendment was simply to direct $50 of that proposed $150 fine, and that $50 would be earmarked for different drug treatment programs. Both the amendments that were proposed passed. I am confident that in the coming days, the Assembly is in fact going to vote on this measure, and I think the likelihood is that they are going to approve it and send it to the Senate.
Is this something that's going to have to get through the Assembly and the Senate with veto-proof majorities, considering Governor Chris Christie's stance on marijuana?
I have no idea in this case. I know, and certainly plenty of people have posted to our message board predicting what they think Chris Christie would or wouldn't do. But to be honest, he's made very ambivalent remarks when it comes to this particular issue. He did make some remarks recently that says he does not favor the legalization of marijuana. How those remarks are relevant to Assembly Bill 1465, which doesn't legalize marijuana, I'm not too clear, but certainly he wanted to get the public message out there that he's not a fan of marijuana. But at the same time, he has made some statements in recent weeks where he has remarked that the current drug war as being practiced in New Jersey and other states doesn't work either, and that as a way to fiscally save costs in a number of these states, one of the things that needs to be considered is not putting so many nonviolent people in jail or in prison. So on the one hand, Chris Christie gets it. On the other hand, he seems to be somewhat reefer mad when it comes to the topic of marijuana. Not sure how he's going to feel about decriminalization if it gets to his desk.
Let's get it to his desk and find out. That's my idea. One last state to take a look at, all the way back out here where medical marijuana started, the state of California. And one of the things they've been trying to do for a long time now is to pass some sort of statewide regulations to make some sense over the sometimes county by county or city by city patchwork of laws that protect medical marijuana in California. So what's the latest status on Tom Amiano's efforts out there?
Well, Tom Amiano is a very marijuana-friendly or pro-marijuana law reform member of the Assembly. Folks may remember a couple years back, he actually got through committee a bill that he was sponsoring to legalize and regulate the production, distribution of marijuana for all adults. This year, he is proposing a measure to try and clarify and regulate the dispensary situation in the state of California, and it's Assembly Bill 2312. As many of your folks may or may not know, when Californians legalized the use of medical marijuana, now 16 years ago, under Prop 215, there's very little clarifying language in the text of the initiative of Prop 215 that establishes how marijuana would be distributed from person to person. It allows for possession, it allows for cultivation, but it says very little about how marijuana would be transferred from one individual to another. In fact, some of the only language in Prop 215 to address the issue of distribution is a clause that encourages state lawmakers to set up an effective and safe distribution scheme for medical marijuana. Well, needless to say, lawmakers in California have never done so. And the vote that we had last Friday, where the Assembly passed Tom Amiano's bill, is really the first time since the passage of Prop 215 that lawmakers in California have actually tried to follow through with the intent of Prop 215 in 1996, and they are now attempting to try and establish a regulatory scheme that would license these dispensaries, it would mandate where they would be, and it would provide some rules for how they're supposed to operate. And this is a measure that many local California groups, like Americans for Safe Access, like California NORML, are supporting because they're hoping that it provides some needed clarity under the law in California, because right now, as many of your listeners know, there are a number of cases pending before the Supreme Court. There's a patchwork system where you have some counties, some cities allowing for dispensaries, some counties and cities aren't allowing for dispensaries. You have some court rulings that say that dispensaries are legal. You have other state court rulings saying they're not. Passage of this legislation would finally provide some clarity for the state, for the operators who are running these facilities, and for the patients who are compliant under the law that simply want to have a safe and reliable place where they can access their medicine.
Yeah, we've got to get this taken care of. We can't have it be county by county, city by city. It's just too dangerous to know when you're going to be safe and where you're not going to be safe. So we look forward to getting some reasonable regulations passed there. Paul Armentano is NORML's Deputy Director, joining us here with a legislative update. And Paul, give him the information again for contacting NORML and getting in touch with their legislators.
Sure. The NORML website is norml.org. Individuals can find detailed information about all of the legislation that we've talked about today by going to the homepage of NORML's website, looking in the right-hand corner, and clicking on the green box that says Act. That is going to take you to a page where we have legislative alerts for all of the legislation statewide that is in play currently, including further information on all the legislation you and I have talked about. And when folks click on those alerts, they are going to have the option to directly contact the state lawmakers in their state on behalf of those marijuana law reform bills. And it is very, very important that people follow up and do that, particularly in states like New Hampshire, New Jersey, and Rhode Island, where we know these votes are pending in the coming days, and lawmakers need to hear from their constituents strong encouragement to vote yes and do the right thing on these measures.
All right. Thank you, Paul, so much for joining us here on the Russ Belville Show.
Thank you.
Don't touch that dial. Radical Russ and the Rolla J Studios crew will be right back after these messages. Does internet radio even have a dial? Guys? This is the Russ Belville Show.
Marijuana and alcohol are the two most popular recreational drugs in America. Marijuana smoking is non-toxic, relatively safe, and has a low risk of dependence.
Coolers after coolers.
Alcohol drinking is potentially fatal, dangerous to society, and is quite addictive. Marijuana is safer, so why are we driving people to drink? That's the question of the new book, Marijuana is Safer, So Why Are We Driving People to Drink? By Paul Armentano, Mason Tvert, and Steve Fox. Visit Amazon.com or ChelseaGreen.com today to order your copy of Marijuana is Safer, or visit MarijuanaIsSafer.com.
Potnet. We're the megaphone of drug law reform.
I'm a doctor. I'm a lawyer. I'm a journalist.
I'm a student.
I'm a teacher.
I'm a representative. I have cancer.
The outdated laws of prohibition are more dangerous than the plant itself. I lost my scholarship.
I was fired.
20 million arrests since 1965. This is getting ridiculous. Our prisons are overcrowded with non-violent offenders.
We have the opportunity to change.
This is costing our country billions of dollars.
Making my family and I fight in a courtroom is difficult enough when I'm already fighting through chemotherapy.
There's no reason to be scared by tradition anymore.
We can stop this.
We can stop this. We are the American people.
We can stop this.
And you have our support. We are old,
young,
straight,
gay.
We're every race and nationality.
And we're not going to give up.
You can tax it.
You can regulate it.
Apply age restrictions.
You can create millions of new jobs.
We can save our economy.
President Obama?
It's time for legalization.
Legalization.
Yes.
We
can.
Activism begins with ACT. The Russ Belville Show features the stories of hardworking grassroots activists working for an end to prohibition in today's activist agenda.
All right, welcome back, everybody. And we have a guest in the studio here joining us from the initiative campaign to legalize marijuana at the constitutional level. We have Adam Smith, campaign manager. How you doing, Adam?
I'm doing great. How you doing?
It's so good to have you here. You know, yesterday we had Paul Stanford on from Oregon Cannabis Tax Act, one of the initiatives. It's the statutory one to legalize marijuana. Tell folks the difference here. What are you trying to do with the constitutional amendment?
The constitutional amendment is very simple. It's 3 sentences long. It says if you're an adult, 21 or over in Oregon, and you are not harming or endangering others, you can have it, you can grow it, you can use it. No problem.
All right. Now, as a constitutional amendment, it's got a higher bar to clear as far as signatures, right?
Right. We need just under 117,000 valid signatures. We have 150,000 raw signatures as of today, I can officially announce. We are looking for about 30 to 35,000 more, and our deadline is July 6th.
All right. So we got 1 month left to get to your goal. How likely is that we're going to make it?
We're going to make it, but we definitely need everybody to pitch in. It's the home stretch. The weather's great. There's events every weekend, and we're hooking up lots of volunteers. And, if you are in Oregon and you got a few free hours and you can grab some petition sheets and head to an event in your town, we have lists of events that are going on, and we need to get them covered.
All right. We'll get into more detail on those in our second hour. But so if the people listening on the podcast for the first hour want to help out, give them the website so they can contact you.
If you go to endprohibitionagain.com. That's endprohibitionagain.com. You'll find our website and you can donate there. You'll find our phone number there, and you can also sign up to volunteer.
All right, let's look at this as if just this initiative were to pass, and not the OCTA, but just this one with the constitutional right to it. How will that affect people? I mean, how much will people be able to have marijuana on their person when they walk around? Will they be able to have it at home? How much can they have? Can they grow?
Right. So we will enshrine in the Constitution the right to have it or grow it for personal use. The legislature will define what personal use limits are, and everybody understands that. And yet it is your constitutional right. You'll be able to have it. You'll be able to walk around with it. Mm-hmm. You'll be able to grow it. We're not trying to set up a commercial system where we want to avoid the problem of the feds coming in after the election and saying, this is our territory, you can't start selling it out of liquor stores or have a commercial system, and winding up in court for a long period of time. What we want to do is set it up so that the state of Oregon will no longer be arresting people for having it, growing it, or using it.
All right, and they get to decide what personal use is. Will they do that? I mean, do they have to do that through statute, or will it happen, as people get busted and court cases start to decide?
Well, the constitutional amendment will go into effect 6 months after after it passes. So it will give the legislature one session to rewrite the marijuana laws of the state around the new constitutional right. And we expect that, especially given the strong political momentum that marijuana advocacy has, I'll throw a pitch for the fact that we helped defeat Dwight Holton. And not when I say we, I mean people who care about this issue.
Right.
We all got up and voted for Ellen Rosenblum and defeated Dwight Holton. I think everybody in the political world in Oregon took notice of that. We hit the ballot in November, and we get 56%. It's going to be very difficult for the legislature to come in and start trying to limit that too broadly. I think that what we will end up with is very reasonable limits, and we will have a marijuana policy in the state that we can begin a conversation from as to what is a full-scale legalization look like.
A lot of the states in America that have decriminalization, the wording of it is they've decriminalized personal use amounts, and that usually gets defined as being about an ounce. East Coast is more likely to be half an ounce. In Ohio, it's 100 grams, 3.5 ounces. So you imagine probably somewhere in that range, maybe?
Somewhere in that range. And, decriminalization is such a funny word. Oregon is officially a state with decriminalization. We've officially decriminalized marijuana, and yet it's a $1,000 fine and a 6-month driver's license suspension. And try not paying that fine and see how decriminalized it feels.
You will exactly find out how that works out. And also, strange thing about Oregon, we're the only state in America where we go from a decriminalized ticket for an ounce to a felony for over an ounce.
Or grow a plant.
There's no misdemeanor in there whatsoever. So we're going to stick around with Adam here and talk more in hour 2. We'll also take your calls at 971-533-7111. But that's it for hour 1. Thanks for joining us here for the show. And stay tuned for Toker Talk Radio coming up next here on Prohibition Opposition Television Network. It's potnet.us. Find our blog posts at radicalruss.com. And for everyone here, Ganja John, Wiz Kaliko, and Cannabis Carrie, I'm Radical Russ. Thanks for joining us.